This house is way too big for one old woman. Linda's voice carried across my front yard like a cold wind. We could really use the space for our growing family. I stood on my porch holding my morning coffee. The same porch where Harold and I had spent 47 years, watching seasons change and neighbors come and go. My wooden jewelry box sat on the porch table. Harold had made it for our first anniversary, the intricate carvings still beautiful after all these years. Linda's eyes kept drifting to it dismissively. Mom Ruth, be practical, my son Michael said, standing beside his wife like a united front. You're 75 and living alone in a 4-bedroom house. It makes no sense anymore. No sense. As if the life Harold and I built made no sense without his physical presence. As if 47 years of memories could be measured in square footage. Linda stepped closer to my porch steps, her voice sweetened with false concern. We're just worried about your safety. All those stairs, that big yard to maintain. I maintain it just fine, I said quietly. Harold taught me how to care for everything. Harold's been gone 3 years, Linda said, her patience wearing thin around the edges. It's time to face reality and make smart decisions. Smart decisions, like selling my home to them, at a price far below market value. Because family should help family, according to Linda's version of fairness. Michael looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me, the son I'd raised to stand up for what's right. Now standing silent while his wife dismantled his mother's life piece by piece. I watched a cardinal land on Harold's bird feeder, still bringing joy to our yard every morning, still working exactly as he'd designed it to work. Some things endure beyond the person who created them. Silence isn't surrender, it's strength gathering its breath. My name is Ruth Anderson. I live in Millfield, Illinois. I was married to Harold for 51 years. I raised 2 children and taught piano lessons from my living room for 3 decades. Today, my daughter-in-law told me my house makes no sense in my own front yard, while my son said nothing to defend the home we built with love and sacrifice. But what Linda doesn't know is this: that wooden jewelry box holds more than trinket. It holds Harold's final gift, something that will change everything about this conversation. If you've ever felt overlooked in your own home, you'll understand why this moment stayed with me. This house on Oak Street has been my sanctuary for 47 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood. Harold and I chose it for the wraparound porch, the big maple tree in the front yard, the way it felt like possibility when we walked inside. We were young newlyweds with more dreams than money. Harold worked construction while I gave piano lessons. We saved every penny for 5 years to make the down payment on this house. The wooden floors still creak their familiar welcome song. I can hear Harold's footsteps in every sound. The kitchen still smells like his morning coffee, and the cinnamon rolls I baked every Sunday. Harold built most of the furniture himself. The dining room table where we shared meals, the bookshelves that hold our favorite novel, the rocking chair where I nursed our babies. Each piece crafted with love and intended to last. The wooden jewelry box on my porch table represents Harold's skill and devotion. He carved it during our first winter together, while snow piled outside, and we learned how to be married instead of just dating. Something beautiful for my beautiful wife, he'd said, presenting it with shy pride on our anniversary. The intricate roses and vines carved around the edges took him 3 months of evening work to complete. Some truths arrive quietly but change everything. Harold died 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack. Working in our garden on a perfect spring morning, he'd been planting tomatoes for our summer harvest, never got to see them grow and ripen. Since then, Linda has been suggesting changes, small at first, then increasingly bold, about how I should live and where I should consider moving for my own good. She sees wasted space and inconvenient maintenance. I see Harold's workshop in the basement, the garden beds we planned together, the bedroom where we held each other through joy and sorrow for 5 decades. Michael inherited Harold's gentle nature but not his backbone. He loves me but wants peace with his wife, more than he wants justice for his mother. It's easier to agree with Linda than to defend what he doesn't fully understand. Linda means well in her own way. She wants security for her family, a bigger house for their children to grow. But she's never understood that some things can't be measured in square feet or dollar signs. The hints started small, like cracks in a foundation. Linda would comment on my grocery bills. All this food for one person seems wasteful. She'd point out maintenance issues during visits. That loose step could cause a fall. These old houses are so much work, as if I hadn't been managing perfectly well. For 3 years without Harold's help, my piano students became a concern for her. All these strangers coming to the house. At your age, it's not safe to let random children inside anymore. Random children, students I'd taught for years, whose parents trusted me with their musical education, whose progress filled me with purpose and connection to the community. Maybe it's time to retire from teaching, she suggested. Enjoy your golden years without all that responsibility. My golden years, as if retirement meant giving up everything that made me feel useful, everything that kept Harold's memory alive. In the house where we'd built our life, dignity whispers what anger cannot. The real pressure began after their second child was born. Linda started mentioning their cramped living situation, how much they needed more space for their expanding family's needs. We've been looking at houses, she said, during one Sunday dinner, but everything's so expensive these days, unless you know someone willing to sell to family at a fair price. A fair price, which she defined as half of what my house was actually worth, because family should sacrifice for family, according to her understanding of obligation. Michael nodded along with her suggestions, not enthusiastically, but without resistance, the path of least conflict, rather than standing up for what was right. We could take such good care of this place, Linda continued, give it the energy and attention it needs for the next generation. As if I wasn't giving it energy and attention, as if 3 years of widowhood had made me incapable of managing the same home I'd maintained for decades. A home remembers the hands that built it. She began pointing out problems that didn't exist. This carpet is getting worn. These appliances are outdated. The whole house needs updating. For safety and efficiency, my carpet was fine. Harold and I had replaced it just 5 years ago. The appliances worked perfectly. The house was safe and comfortable, but Linda saw only opportunities for improvement. Of course, we'd let you stay, she added. There's a nice mother-in-law suite in the basement you could fix up. It would be perfect for someone your age who needs less space. Less space in my own home. While they enjoyed the rooms Harold and I had filled with love, the basement where I'd be tucked away, out of sight and out of mind, I began to understand then. This wasn't about my safety or their concern. This was about desire disguised as caring, greed wrapped in family obligation. Spring arrived with its usual promises, but this year felt different, heavier somehow. Linda's visits became more frequent, her suggestions more insistent about my future plans. She'd walk through my house like an appraiser, noting which furniture would stay or go, which rooms needed renovation, how the space could better serve their family's needs. We could knock out this wall, she'd say, gesturing toward my piano room. Open up the whole first floor, make it more modern and functional. My piano room, where I'd taught hundreds of students, where Harold would sit and listen while I played his favorite songs, where music had filled our home with beauty and purpose for 30 years. Pianos are so hard to move, she'd add. Maybe it's time to donate it to someone who'll actually use it regularly. Actually use it, as if my daily playing and weekly lessons meant nothing, as if music was a luxury rather than the heartbeat of our home. Some objects hold memories, not value. I started noticing things more carefully. How Linda measured windows for new curtains, how she discussed the backyard with Michael, as if it already belonged to them. We could put a swing set back there, she'd say. Maybe a sandbox for the kids. Really make this a family home again. As if Harold and I hadn't been a family worthy of this space. As if our childless later years somehow invalidated our claim to call it home. My wooden jewelry box became a frequent topic. Linda would pick it up and examine it, with the eye of someone calculating value. This is a nice piece, she'd say. Hand-carved work like this is probably worth something at auction. When you're ready to downsize your possessions? When I'm ready. Not if I'm ready. As if my consent was assumed, rather than required for such major changes. But she had no idea what that box really contained. Beyond the costume jewelry and old photographs, she saw only the surface value, missing the deeper treasure hidden inside. Harold had been a careful man, methodical in his planning and preparation. 3 years ago, when his heart started giving him warnings about mortality, he had made provisions for my protection. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. The wooden jewelry box held his final gift, not just the beautiful craftsmanship he'd put into creating it, but documents that would change everything about Linda's assumptions and plans, a will that left everything to me completely, with specific protections against family members who might try to pressure me into decisions I didn't want to make. But more than that, Harold had been busier than I'd realized. In those final months before his death, making investments and arrangements that Linda had no knowledge of. She thought I was a vulnerable widow, living on Social Security and memories, struggling to maintain a house too big for my diminished circumstances. She had no idea how wrong she was about my financial situation, about my options and independence, about the man she'd underestimated, who'd spent 51 years protecting the woman he loved. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in May. Michael arrived alone, his face wearing that careful expression I'd learned to dread in recent months of family discussion. "Mom, we need to talk seriously," he said, sitting across from me at Harold's dining table. "Linda and I have been discussing your situation, and we're really concerned about your future." My situation, as if I was a problem, to be solved rather than a person, to be loved and respected. "We think it's time to make some changes," he continued. "This house is too much responsibility for someone your age living alone, someone my age, 75 years old and suddenly incompetent, despite managing perfectly well for 3 years, since Harold's death without major incident. We found a nice senior community," Michael said. "Sunshine Gardens has lovely apartment, all maintenance included, meals provided. You wouldn't have to worry about anything and wouldn't have to worry because I'd have no control over anything, no choices about my daily life, no connection to the community where I'd lived for nearly 5 decades. What about my piano student?" I asked. "My garden? My neighbors? My whole life?" "You could make new friends," he said. "There are activities and programs. It could be a fresh start. After all these years of grief." Stories like this remind us that clarity heals more than confrontation. Grief, as if loving Harold was something I needed to get over, rather than something that gave my life meaning and direction. "We could really use this house," Michael admitted. "The kids need more space. Linda's been looking at the budget, and we could make it work if we got a good price from family." There it was. The real reason behind their concern, not my welfare, but their convenience, not my happiness, but their financial benefit. "We'd take good care of it," he promised. "Keep it in the family. Maybe you could visit sometime. See how the kids enjoy the backyard you and Dad loved. Visit sometime." My own home, where I'd lived longer than Michael had been alive, reduced to an occasional guest, in the rooms where Harold and I had built our marriage and dreams. I looked at my son's face, searching for the boy I'd raised, to value justice over convenience, to protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them for gain. "Has Linda convinced you I'm incompetent?" I asked directly. "Not incompetent," he said quickly, "just struggling to keep up with everything this house requires. It would be easier for everyone if you were somewhere safer. Easier for everyone except the person whose life would be dismantled, whose independence would be eliminated, whose identity would be erased." That night I sat in Harold's rocking chair, holding his wooden jewelry box in my lap, feeling the smooth wood he'd carved with such love and care. "Time to use your gift, my darling," I whispered. "Time to show them who they're really dealing with." The next morning brought clarity. Along with Linda's unexpected visit, she arrived with real estate brochures and a confident smile that suggested the decision had already been made. "I brought some information," she said, spreading papers across my kitchen table, "about Sunshine Gardens and some other options for seniors ready to downsize their lives." Ready to downsize, as if I'd expressed any interest in reducing my world to fit their vision of what was appropriate. "We also got a preliminary estimate," she continued, "on what this house might sell for between family members. It's quite generous considering the work it needs. Generous, half of the actual market value for a house in perfect condition that Harold and I had made with love and careful attention." "We could close quickly," Linda said. "Have you settled somewhere nice before winter comes? No need for lawyers or complications." No need for lawyers, because she assumed I was too naive or trusting to protect my own interests. That's when I decided the time had. Calm truth cuts deeper than loud accusation. "Linda, before we discuss anything further," I said, "I need to show you something that might change your perspective." I walked to my porch table, where Harold's wooden jewelry box sat in the morning sunshine. I brought it back to the kitchen and set it carefully on the table. "Harold made this for me," I said, "for our first wedding anniversary, but it holds more than jewelry." I opened the box slowly, showing Linda the earrings and bracelets she'd seen many times before. Then I pressed the hidden panel Harold had carved into the bottom. A secret compartment opened, revealing documents that Linda had never imagined existed. "What is that?" she asked, her confidence beginning to waver. "Harold's final gift to me," I said. "He was a wise man who understood that sometimes family members might try to take advantage of a widow's supposed vulnerability. I pulled out the first document, Harold's will, properly witnessed and notarized, leaving everything to me with specific clauses about protecting my independence. Linda's face grew pale as I read the legal language that prevented anyone from pressuring me into selling my home against my will. Some distances heal more than apology, but the will was just the beginning. Harold had been busier than anyone knew. In those final months before his death, the second document showed investment I'd never mentioned to anyone, stock purchases and bond portfolio that had grown significant over the past 3 years. Your father-in-law was smarter than people gave him credit for, I said. He left me very well provided for, far beyond what you've assumed. The third document was a deed to another property across town, a rental house that generated monthly income I'd never needed for daily expenses. Linda stared at the papers, understanding dawning about her assumption, about my financial vulnerability, about her leverage in these discussions. There's one more thing, I said quietly. Harold also wrote a letter about what to do if family members tried to manipulate me into giving up my independence. I unfolded Harold's final letter, written in his careful handwriting, full of love and protective wisdom. He knew this day might come, I continued, when someone would mistake my kindness for weakness, my age for incompetence, my grief for helplessness. The letter outlined specific steps to take if I felt pressured, including lawyers Harold had already contacted about protecting elderly widows from financial exploitation. Michael arrived as I was finishing the letter that changed everything about their assumptions and plans. You heard us talking, he said quietly. I heard you planning my future. Without consulting me, I replied. I heard my son agree to dispose of everything his father and I built together. But this wasn't about punishment or humiliation or revenge. This was about restoration of respect and boundaries, of relationships based on truth rather than manipulation. The silence that followed stretched between the family we'd been and the family we might become if we chose honesty over assumptions, growth over greed. Linda spoke first, her voice small. Ruth, I had no idea about any of this. I thought you were struggling financially. I never said I was struggling, I replied gently. You assumed I was, based on what seemed logical for a widow my age. Michael looked at the document, understanding finally dawning about his father's wisdom and his mother's true circumstances. Dad planned for this, he said quietly. He knew we might not understand how capable you still are. Your father understood something important, I said. That taking care of someone doesn't mean taking control of them. That love should build people up, not tear them down. We spent the next hour talking honestly about assumptions and reality, about the difference between helping and controlling someone you care about. Linda apologized for her pressure, about selling the house, about assuming I needed saving from circumstances I was managing perfectly well. I was projecting my own fears, she admitted, about what might happen to me someday, about being alone and vulnerable. And I was afraid, Michael added, of losing you like I lost Dad, of not being able to protect you from every possible danger. But protection should increase independence, I said, not eliminate it. Your father understood that when he made these arrangements. Some objects hold memories, not value. We talked about going forward differently, about asking instead of assuming, about trusting my judgment, until evidence suggested otherwise. I want to be someone you're glad to see, Linda said, not someone you have to defend yourself against. You can be, I assured her. We can build something better, based on who we really are. The wooden jewelry box sat between us, a bridge between Harold's wisdom and our new understanding, between the past he'd protected and the future we could build together. Over the following months, our relationships changed. Linda stopped suggesting I downsize, started asking about my piano student, started listening to stories about Harold and our life together. Michael visited more often, not to assess my condition, but to spend time with the mother, who'd raised him to be better than he'd been behaving recently. They brought the grandchildren more often to learn piano and hear stories about their grandfather's craftsmanship and their grandmother's independence. I want them to know, Michael said, that being older doesn't mean being helpless or disposable. That wisdom comes from experience, not from giving up control. Christmas that year felt like celebration rather than obligation. Linda brought homemade gifts that showed thought and care. Michael helped with preparation without questioning my methods. We exchanged presents with genuine affection. Linda gave me a beautiful music book. For all those mean students who are lucky to learn from you. Michael's gift was a new bird feeder. To go with Dad's, he said. So the cardinals have even more reason to visit your garden. If this story touched something familiar, may your next chapter be softer than the last. I learned important lessons about the difference between love and control, between helping and manipulating, between protecting and imprisoning someone you care about. Your life belongs to you, no matter your age or circumstances. Guard it with wisdom and preparation, like Harold did for me. Real love trusts people to know their own limitations. Real care offers support without demanding surrender. Real protection builds strength rather than creating dependence. Age brings experience, not incompetence. Gray hair represents wisdom, not confusion. And sometimes, the strongest defense is simply being prepared. For people who underestimate you, the wooden jewelry box still sits on my porch table every morning. Harold's gift that keeps on giving. Protection, independence, and proof that love endures beyond death in the preparations we make for those we leave behind.